All right. Hey everyone, my name is Nick Brandt. I'm the product designer in product planning. And today I'm going to talk to you a little bit about work items and a unified listing page that we're working towards right now. So just to give a little bit of background on this, so like the current state of our list pages are we have two separate pages for issues versus epics, as you probably all know today. This presents some different problems. One being, users really expect to be able to plan across all their planning objects rather than having to manage, two separate lists when doing this. It's also helpful to be able to actually visualize hierarchies when you're in the planning process and understand different relationships while you're doing that. And the third thing that I mentioned here is that when searching for work items or browsing to see if, say, like you're unsure of a feature is already documented that we're working towards or that we've had the idea of implementing in the future. If I'm not sure, like technically this could be like an issue or an epic, and like a lot of times. So if you're not sure if we have documented this as an issue or an epic, I'm going to have to browse or search across both these different lists today to try and determine whether or not we've already kind of captured this feature that we want to kind of work towards. So those are some of like a few of like the main problems. There's other ones absolutely that kind of contribute to this problem. But those are kind of like the some of the top level ones. So an easy way to solve some of these problems is to, okay, well, it really makes sense to have all these objects within one unified listing so I can do all my planning from one area instead of having to kind of bounce between two separate lists and do filtering in two separate lists and kind of manage that. So it's pretty straightforward in terms of like what we're proposing here, of like combining these lists. But as I was working on this, it's a good opportunity to kind of think about some other things as well and to take a little bit of a higher stance or a higher look into some of the other things that we're looking towards working towards for both our like list page as well as like our planning workflows. And some of those things are things like nesting, the ability to actually, when we have that combined listing of epics and issues, like we also want to be able to see those relationships, kind of like what I was talking to before about one of the problems of being able to understand these relationships. So being able to kind of drill down into epics and even issues to see their underneath tasks is one of the things that we want to offer. Another thing would be the ability to group by various criteria. So today you can't really group an issue list by certain things like, say, milestone or assignee, or in the future when we have like different statuses, like status would be another very valuable one to group by. So that's something else that we want to look into offering in the future. Another thing that we're considering is metadata visibility. So today you really have no controls over which things within your listing are visible, such as like maybe I want to turn off labels, or I don't really care to see how many comments have been made, or we don't use, iterations or milestones very often, and so I don't want to see those. Um, so being able to control what you see could be valuable for certain individuals. Um, some other things would be view modes. So today we have separate pages for lists and we have separate pages for boards, as well as we also have roadmaps. This requires you to oftentimes do a lot of the same queries on different pages in order to see things in a different way. Whereas it would be nice if you could just do one query, kind of filter your data set down, and then be able to toggle between various different view modes. And the last thing on here that I have is saved views. And so this is just really the ability to save, retrieve, and share commonly utilized filtered views or visualizations of data. Just a way to get back to things that you're commonly using within your workflows. What I'm not including with some of this work is evaluating things like a new filter pattern. Like this is something that we've considered and something that we probably want to, work towards in the future, but this is a larger effort that's going to be kind of outside of this vision work that I was currently working on. Another thing that isn't currently included is an integration with GLQL. So this is definitely something on our minds and something that we want to look at how we can integrate with our current list page. But it's not something that I have in this current kind of more near-term vision that I'm working on for this consolidated listing page. And the last thing here is a roadmap view mode. So you'll see that I'm looking at kind of combining our current boards and list pages in some of these visions. But I'm not currently looking at including the roadmap, and that's because one, we have a lot of work to do on roadmaps to kind of overhaul that and make it significantly better. But also we need to do some more kind of architectural work to make that support work items better before we can really start to integrate that with our list page. And then like I just have like a disclaimer here, like this is the designs that I'm about to go through are all very much high level. I kind of tried to, go through like a wide variety of considerations as I was working through them, but by no means are these finalized, tested, or validated in any way. It's just more so just looking at like a vision of where we planning to go, knowing that there's a lot of considerations that we still have to kind of determine as we work towards this. So that all said, let's kind of jump in and look at what I'm put together as this vision. So some kind of first things that I'll point out of differences in this listing page. So like the one that kind of most obvious is now this page is called work items. So before, we had epics and lists within like a group section. Now this has been consolidated to one thing called work items, where now I'm seeing not only epics, but also issues within one list. The other thing that you'll notice offhand is we've removed these tabs at the top. So we're currently using those tabs essentially as filtered data, which we can actually support just by using filters within our current filter bar. It's best to do this just because one, like we kind of discourage the use of tabs for filters within pajamas, but also like it's not necessarily views that you're commonly really going back to for like close and all. If you look at some of our data, like the open tab, yes, it's our default tab, and of course it's going to have more views, but the amount of people actually utilizing closed versus all is quite low. And this still allows you to get to those views quite easily, such as like if I want to view all of my items instead of just open, I simply remove this token. Bear with me, this prototype is a little bit slow at times. And now I'm viewing all items. Another way that this could be changed, reapply this, is I can just simply click into the value and change this to any or closed. And I can also quickly switch when I'm viewing it by doing that method as well. So one benefit here is, so we have these counts for open, closed, all, and these all update whenever you do a search, which is below those counts. That's a bit odd just because you're essentially having something that's done below the tab affect the tab itself. And so now you'll notice like the count is actually below this filter area. So like when I apply a filter, you'll see it directly affected below that item. Some other differences that you'll notice here are some additional items within this header area. I'll get into some of the more details about these later, but essentially like this is the ability to change view modes between list and board. And then this is some display options where you can, that group by that I was talking about before, so I can group by certain criteria. I can decide to whether or not I want to see or not nesting, so I can change this to be a flat list if I wanted to, as well as I could, turn on or off various different metadata that we're showing within the view. And then sort remains pretty much unchanged, so that's consistent. And then like a very small minor change here is like as you're scrolling down the page, you'll notice that we're actually fixing this filter bar at the top where we don't do any sort of fixing today in production. This allows you to continue to see like what you're filtered by, as well as if you wanted to make any changes at that point as well. But let's say that I've gone in here and I want us, our team is working towards like a product redesign launch. and I want to be able to see all those different items in this list. So let's go ahead and filter as we typically would from this list. Search that. And now I'm filtered by this launch label. So one of the things that you'll notice once I did that is we've introduced this new area for save view. So the way this is currently working is basically anytime you manipulate the filters that are applied um, by default, such as like I change this to close, or I move it, or I add a new label, or I add any other filter, this is going to show up as an option to save that view. I'll go into the details of what that flow looks like here in a minute. But before I do that, let's kind of configure this view a little bit more based off of what we were looking for. So let's say I also wanted to view these items, grouped by something like milestone. So now you'll see within this listing, I have my items, but they're all now grouped by the different milestones that we have available. So that's nice. But let's say that I actually want to view this as a board because this is kind of the way our team works, and I want to have it this visualization instead. So I simply make that change. We maintain all that same kind of filtered set with the view mode as well. Um, and then this is kind of what I'm looking for. So at this point, now I can go ahead and say like, okay, I want to save this view so I can share it with my team and we can refer back to it whenever we need to. So I can go ahead and hit save view. And right now we're really only capturing a little bit of information. A title, description probably would be optional, which would indicate. And then one other thing for kind of visibility. And so right now it's just a toggle for private or not. And how this would work is if it's not set to private, this would show up for anyone within this context, within this group who has access. If it is set to private, only I by default would see this in the listing. I'd have the ability to share it with others if I wanted to, but it just wouldn't show up by default in like the main views listing. So it would this kind of prevents there from being like a clutter of all these different views that everyone's created when, half or three-quarters of these are maybe personal and something that I just created by myself and not really sharing with others. But let's go ahead and say, I give it a title, description, and I want this one to not be private. I want it to be visible to everyone within the group. So I create this view. So one thing right off the bat here that you'll notice is this popover. And this is here. This could be done in a few different ways. Right now I have it as a popover, but we essentially want to indicate that this change is happening right now. So the change that I'm talking about is like we were in work items before. Now we're in a section called views, which is new. We want to make it clear, like once you perform that action that you've been taken here. And so this is a way to kind of explain that the first time that you perform an action or create a view from work items to help you understand that relationship. So I can, close that out. But some other things that you'll notice here are, so like this page was called work items before, and now you'll see this replaced with the actual name of my view, along with like a little caret here indicating I could, change that, and which would just essentially bring up, essentially a select of being able to switch all the different views that are available from this context, showing some of our recent ones here up on top. Another difference is we have this kind of configure or edit or settings button up here for the view. And this would just be a lot of the same information that you've set up when you first created the view. I think there also needs to be like the ability to probably delete or archive the view from here, which isn't included, but that would also be available. And then you also notice that that save view option is now gone because this is essentially your starting point for the view. This is the default of what you set up. If you make any changes after this, like if I added a new filter or even adjusted some of the different view options, we would then have the ability to save or update the view again, which would then apply that update for everyone else who has the view as well. Um, let's see here. All right, let's say that now I can show you the actual views page. So this is showing you an actual detail of a view, similar like a detail of a work item. But if I were to actually click on this views page itself, this is actually a listing of all of the different views that are available within this context. This would have like an empty state initially with maybe some kind of preset um, view options or views that were set up by default, kind of like what we do for boards when you first open it for the first time. We have like a development board set up for you. We could do something similar with saved views, where we have like maybe one or two boards set up for them, as well as maybe like some sort of like initial empty state or instructions about this new capability on this page. But this is essentially showing once I've actually already saved a bunch of different views. So essentially we're only showing, things like the title, the description, the default view mode of the board, and things like the updated date. You'd be able to um, star or favorite these different boards, which I'll show you how that can affect things, as well as we have some options to like edit or archive or delete from here as well. And I could change this to seeing just my start items. And I think a setting like this would probably be persistent. If I, left, went to work items or a different area, came back, I think it would stay on whatever selection I have here. That way, like if I, really only care about my starred views, like I'm always able to quickly get to those. But another way that starred becomes valuable is we have the your work section. And the idea here is that whenever I star a view, it would actually then show up in this new view section within your work as well. So these are ones that are either starred or ones that I've specifically created and maybe haven't explicitly starred. But then I could, filter this based off of that various criteria as well. But this really leverages the ability to get back to views that I'm commonly using, which is a really big pain point that a lot of our customers have of, I'm constantly creating bookmarks of different boards or list filters that I'm commonly using. And it would be great if you could just save those views and then be able to have an area where I can easily get back to those at any point. And so this helps to kind of address that problem by using saved views. Let's see here. Another way that this really becomes powerful, not only like this consolidated listing page, but also the ability to create saved views, is when you're starting to think about the organizations level. So I don't have designs up showing this specifically, but the idea is that if you're at the organization level, you're only going to have access to the thing or see things that you have access to. So a lot of the problems that we have with customers today is there's really no way for them to create a listing of say, I want to view items from, project A and project B within like a list or board. But I don't have access to that top level group. And I'm not allowed to have access to that based off of our current inheritance rules. Or if I have access to that top level group, that means I have access to everything underneath it. But with organizations, that's not how it'll work. If you have access to the organization, that doesn't necessarily mean you have access to everything underneath it, but it still just maintains access to the things that you've specifically been indicated access to. So if I have access to project A and B, and I'm at the organization level where we would also have work items, you could then create these different saved views, and I would be able to filter by things like those projects. And I can pull up kind of what I'm talking about. So this is a bit of an older version, but essentially this is what I'm talking about. Is I'm at the organization level. We still have a plan section and work items available here. But now I can filter down to like say, oh, I want to see project A and project C, which I have access to. And now I'm presented with a list of items that match that. And so this solves that problem of not needing necessarily access to like a root group where I get all those, permissions to view everything underneath it, but I can still create these different views that are needed by having that higher level available. Let me check, just make sure I'm not missing anything. Oh, one thing I didn't cover as it relates to boards. So there will be some differences when you switch to boards in terms of like some of the display options. So another thing that I didn't mention that I wasn't accounting for with with this vision work is showing relationships on boards. So we had that nesting capability from the list page, and you'll notice that that's actually not visible when I'm on a board. So if I go here on a list, I can show nesting. If I go on a board, that's actually gone. We do plan to look at ways that we can start to show relationships, so like showing kind of some that child items exist for a given item or indicating a parent of an item from board cards. But it's not something um, that I've included in this specific vision, and it's probably a little bit further down the road from what we currently are doing. And then the other option here that you'll notice that changed when I went to boards is I had this subgroup option. So these names aren't by any means finalized. We may decide that group by and subgroup don't resonate very well with users, and we need something that kind of um, more represents what they're seeing here of like, oh, this should be like columns versus like rows. But this subgroup option currently is essentially indicating swim lanes. So today you can use epic swim lanes from a board where it'll essentially, kind of break all this up into separate rows for each epic. But we'll eventually be offering different other options for swim lanes, which would be under this secondary grouping option, whatever we end up calling this. All right, so those are some of the major kind of points that I wanted to kind of go over as it relates to like some of the different enhancements or features that we're working towards with this consolidated work items listing. What's next for me is so like I kind of took a step back from that initial ask of consolidating the listing of just including like epics and issues. And I went more high level looking into the future. Now what I need to do is kind of narrow that back down to like, okay, what does the first iteration of this look like? That's going to be combining um, combining those items of epics and issues, but probably not starting off with showing nesting. Um, It wouldn't include things like saved views or the ability to toggle between boards and lists. So I need to kind of narrow this back down to like this kind of first iteration of what we're working towards. But this helps us kind of understand where we're going and to make considerations for other things, while we're working towards these kind of more iterative efforts. And it also helps. I've gotten a lot of questions from my engineering team about where we're going with various things as it relates to like display preferences and how we're remembering those things. And so like this becomes valuable to help in those conversations as well to kind of look towards where we're going with some of this work and be able to explain some of that. But that's all I have.
Awesome. Thanks for sharing, Nick. It looks like we have a few questions on the agenda. Pedro, are you on the call? You have the first question.
Yeah, I'm on the call. Thank you so much, Nick. As I mentioned on my second point, it's really fascinating work, and you can tell you've invested quite a bit in the prototype, but that really helps to make people excited about these ideas, and also seeing a lot of these ideas come to life that have been discussed in, many different places here and there across the years, and seeing all of this put together, it's really good. Yeah, my first question is, what kind of feedback are you looking for in the designs you've shown from and feedback from this group specifically?
Yeah. So I mean, like I said, this is really it's very much high level at this point, but it is looking like you can see some of the larger pieces of like like our initial assumptions and plans are. And if anyone has any feedback or concerns with any of like those kind of bigger decisions, I'm definitely looking to hear any thoughts on those. As it relates to like, smaller considerations like, what we're terming group by or, how a specific scenario will happen with like filtering. Like those are things that like are obviously going to be need to go through like much more detail once we actually get to like the specific features that or iterations that cover those items and haven't really been fully considered yet. So I'm not looking for that sort of feedback. But as it relates to like kind of these higher decisions and these bigger picture items, I definitely would love to hear any feedback that others have around it.
Awesome. Thank you. I do have a question, but that's maybe I don't know if it's more macro or micro. But if it is more micro, you can tell me, don't worry about this, we will get there. But my question is more related to the number of views. So how many views on average are we expecting users to have? And how might we reduce the time it takes for the user to see a view in case they just use one view 80% of the time, for example?
Yeah, I mean, it's a good question. I think it'll really depend a lot on, you know, how different teams work. I don't expect, users to have like, a significant amount of use that they're utilizing on a day-to-day basis. But I think that's where having that your work section becomes really beneficial and being able to star and save various or the specific views that you are returning to often. So I envision only really like a handful of views that you're commonly utilizing. When it comes to like views that are actually on like your views page within these different contexts, that's where like these could be quite substantial lists because it could be at like a group level where there's, many different teams working here and creating various views that they're not necessarily making private. And so like these lists could be quite large. But that's, I think, where like the power of favoriting or starring these different things becomes really ideal because at that point I can kind of indicate these are the things that I'm commonly using, and it makes it easy to get back to those specific ones that you're needing. Hopefully that answered your question.
Yeah, a little bit. I'm thinking more of the case where, for example, and this is just again, I don't know if you have data that could be a proxy for what I'm asking, but I'm just assuming, I'm an engineer and I'm working on a project, and so I'm primarily looking at a board of, the current iteration or the current milestone, and that's where I look 80, 90, maybe just 100% of the time. And so how many clicks would it take for me to see that view? Um, do I have to click into views and then the view that I want, even if it's starred, or can I just go to the work items, for example, and it shows the last view that I was in?
Yeah, it's definitely something like so right now we have views essentially split out from work items. Like the moment you create a saved view, it takes you to a separate area of the product. We did earlier on look at integrating save views within like this main listing page and being able to kind of like switch views from here or display views and kind of like a horizontal sort of navigation. What that was quickly becoming apparent was that it's really hard to manage that from this single location, especially when you start to look at, all the different views that users or teams will create and being able to kind of make all those interactions work together as well as like understand like what I'm viewing at a given time. Um, this is why we kind of move towards splitting this out and it handles scaling much better. Um, but I can definitely like I'm always happy to review some other previous kind of explorations we had for where we started with some of this work in terms of like having save views integrated to this listing. Um, as it relates to like how many clicks does it take to get to a view? So like one option we also had considered initially was not having a listing page specifically in views and it taking you directly to like the last view you had say like had opened. And then just mainly relying on this like switching mechanism to switch to different views. That said, like it's kind of how boards currently work, and there's a lot of feedback around how that experience even of switching boards isn't the most ideal, especially when you're using kind of a smaller drop down. This is even bigger than what we typically use. Um, but I think like if you're looking just at like clicks, like I think it can be quite easy to get to a view that you have favorited if we introduce one like this view section within your work, or have other ways that we have like favorited stuff available within our main navigation. So right now we just have like favorited views, but I know there's been ideas of having other different starter favorited items. And if we had a quick way to kind of navigate to those things outside of having to go to a specific location, I think that could be another way that we can make it easy to get back to kind of saved items quickly.
Yeah, thank you. I have to jump to another call, but this was very insightful. And yeah, please consider that use case of just an engineer that just looks at one, two boards every month, because I think that is going to be something huge in this split between looking at your default or the board you look at 100% of the time, and that other task which I think this list is perfect for, which is managing and navigating a big list of views. And I think those two things are separate, but yeah, really appreciate your work in this. Thank you, Nick.
Yeah, well, thanks for the question.
Awesome. Thanks for sharing all. Just for time, the rest of the questions will have to be async, but there's a lot of great conversation in the doc. So I'd encourage you all to check that out. And thanks so much for sharing, Nick.